Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bloomberg UK, a special focus on the biggest challenges facing the British government, the economy, financial services and markets. I'm Francie Nakwa here in London. So it's increasingly likely that the UK will head to the polls before the end of the year. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said it's his working assumption that there will be an election in the second half of the year. Now, that means a vote here in the UK in the backdrop of an election across the Atlantic. It's the first time that's happened in 6 decades. Now, as Donald Trump races towards a rematch against Joe Biden, how will the former U.S. president's resurgence actually shape politics and conversations in Britain? Well, let's bring in Bloomberg Opinion's Adrian Woolridge and our city editor here in London, Catherine Griffiths. So thank you both for joining us. I mean, I like Adrian's pieces because they're always devastatingly funny and scathing of all those involved. So usually people say, I hope I'm not in Adrian's column this week. I mean, you basically say that, the UK Conservative Party should stick together if they want a chance to win the election, and they're just, pulling each other apart.
They are pulling each other apart, and they look extremely absurd. For two reasons I try and say in my column. One is that every single Tory who is interviewed on the radio or the television these days is a knight or a dame. They have this overproduction of honorifics, which sounds very odd. But the second and more important one is that they're acting like a far-left party. They're acting, they're divided into squabbling factions, and their working assumption is the only reason that people aren't going to vote for them in the election is they aren't conservative, they aren't pure enough. They're going for this sort of myth of purity. And it creates a very, very odd impression. I say in my column it's a combination of Ruritania and student far-left politics.
But so there are a lot of questions on whether Rishi Sunak will lead, the party into the next elections, whether there's going to be a leadership contest, whether the Chancellor stays. I mean, it seems like they're running out of time. Nothing much will change, or am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. There's a limit to how many prime ministers you can get rid of. And I think they've reached that limit some time ago. I should say that Italy looks incredibly stable compared with Britain. But this week, a Tory former minister who very many people had not heard of, called Sir Simon Clarke, called for Rishi Sunak to go, and there was a bit of a fuss about that. Now, he didn't do this sort of execution very well, and the Tory party has closed ranks a little bit behind Rishi Sunak, and very senior people, all called Sir or Dame, this or that, have said that he spoke out of turn. But nevertheless, there's a sort of this constant drip feed of people rubbishing Rishi Sunak, saying he needs to go. And you're going to get the worst of both worlds, which is that Rishi will lead the Conservative Party into the next election, but he'll be weakened by all this backstabbing.
Dame Catherine is really, really outraged by your calling out of dames and knights. When you look, Catherine, at the elections, the timing of the election, which we think will be towards the end of the year, there was talk about April, but maybe towards the end of the year. Well, actually, if it is Trump-Biden, and Trump seems to have this in the bag for the Republican nomination, does his way of talking actually influence policies or elections in the UK?
Yeah, I think they do to an extent. I suppose it's on both the Labour side and the Conservative side. You've got Sunak, who, as we've just been discussing, is under all sorts of pressure, may come under further pressure to sort of endorse Trump views that he may not otherwise want to endorse, but he will kind of constantly be asked whether he agrees or doesn't agree. And then on the Labour side, the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, may also come under pressure to disagree with Trump. But, of course, if he gains power, he may be then having to work with Trump. So it's very awkward.
Yeah, do you think, does it actually change at the margins, the conversations had here?
Oh, quite a lot. I think for exactly the reasons we've heard. The Labour Party is united in its dislike of Trump. But if you're too vocal in your dislike of Trump, and Trump is the president eventually, that is not very good for our closest ally. The problem with the Tory party is they're very, very deeply divided over Trump. The majority of Conservative MPs really don't like him. But there is a faction of people like Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg who think he's great, he's the bee's knees, and they want a more Trumpified Conservative party. So that's a big problem for Rishi Sunak, who couldn't be more different from Trump in style, but will find it very difficult to distance himself from him.
Adrian also has a very funny column on Davos where he says it's only the pushy people that go to Davos. Catherine and I were there. A lot of the talk was actually on Labour, right, and what they mean for UK business. How did they do?
I think they did do really well, and in a way I suppose they were always likely to, but they were helped by the fact that Chancellor Jeremy Hunt didn't get in until late at night because he had to stay in the UK for the Rwanda vote, which sort of in a way kind of epitomised all of the sort of troubles that the Conservatives are having. But Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, Jonathan Reynolds, the business spokesperson for Labour, had a great time. They had lots of meetings, they went to all the fancy parties, I think some with you, Francine, maybe. And
I don't know if they were fancy, but they were late-night ones.
Yeah, and, you know, and they were the talk of the town. But talking to some sort of senior finance people, they like the prospect that they think Labour might bring in terms of sort of stability, which is an ironic state of affairs in many ways. But they also do think that Labour at the moment is slightly trying to have it both ways. Yeah. They want to court business on the one hand, but they are keeping their cards very close on their actual policies.
Like tax. We don't really know, actually, what they do with corporation tax.
Exactly what they're going to do with corporation tax. And then also sort of things which might seem a bit niche and kind of rich people's problems to many people, like carried interest, what's going to happen to private equity. The country won't really care if, you know, private equity barons are going to get taxed more. But actually, if you talk to sort of fairly sensible people in finance, they say, well, that's all very well, but if that money really does move, as it well might, then that could be a problem for Labour.
Do we have any indication, Catherine, on when we'll know the policies? Are they crafted, but are they keeping it secret, or are they still trying to figure out their messaging?
I think they are, to an extent, still trying to figure out, but they are keeping a lot secret.
Rwanda, I mean, it was quite a week, right,
yes,
on the Rwanda vote.
Absolutely.
What happens next?
Well, one thing we'll be certain of, and that is that we will not be sending large numbers of people, or probably even small numbers of people, to Rwanda. This is all really a performance. In fact, by the time that we get the next election, which will probably be in November, this policy will not have any effect. We're having an enormous fight. The Tory party is tearing itself apart about a policy which is symbolic more than anything else. It's not going to have any practical effect.
And Adrian, you had this actually in your column today, which made us, well, it's an interesting quote, so we're going to bring it up. The real challenge, Adrian writes, for purists is not how to minimize the damage in the next election. They have long since decided that the election is lost, but how to make sure that Sunak and his supposed moderate supporters get the blame. They will then be able to capture the party's leadership and complete the Brexit revolution. I mean, is this Rwanda?
This is part of it. This is what it's all about. I mean, for the Brexit people, everything is about sovereignty, getting out of any sort of international court, having complete control over what you do within your borders, getting rid of international relations with other countries that are formalised. So, you know, Trumpism in that sense, but also a broader policy of making Britain great, which will mean a smaller welfare state, which will mean, I think, you know, much more encouragement for people to have children, for example. That's one of the big worries that they have of population decline, a much more restrictive attitude to immigration. These people on the right of the Conservative Party have a vision of a conservative revolution, and that's what they want to push through. And winning the next election, which they're not going to do anyway, is nothing to them, really. It's what sort of Conservative Party we have.
Do they want afterwards? Catherine, what's the mood amongst investors? I mean, I know, you know, in certain meetings they do ask about Rwanda because they can't really get their head around it. And so they say, look, do I want to be invested in this country that's trying to do these things against the will and kind of like, you know, challenge the legality. But a lot of them also say, if you look at both parties, they're actually fairly middle, or there's not that much of a difference between policies of Labour and Tory. Yeah,
very much so. I think the sort of feeling in the last few weeks before this latest blow-up in the Conservative Party was that feeling of, well, actually, in this year of massive elections, the UK, the choices are OK. But if these things do, when they flare up, things like Rwanda, and any sense in which there's the rule of law is being kind of undermined, international investors absolutely hate it. But I think this point about sovereignty is so fascinating because actually, I think investors think about it in those terms too, that on the one hand, there's been this huge sort of desire for sovereignty, but on the other hand, well, OK, here you are, we have it now. And actually, therefore, people who rule this country need to take responsibility for what that really means. So for many years, the governments may have had sort of various different ideas, but in a way, we were kind of cushioned by being in Brussels and being in the EU. And again, to take this policy, say, on private equity, well, actually, really, if the Labour government really did decide to kind of radically alter that tax rate, well, this is sovereignty in action. We are a standalone country now, and we will actually see what happens to sort of real implications in the business world.
Catherine and Adrian, thank you so much. Both stay with us. We'll have plenty more, of course, also from our interview with the UK City Minister, who says capital renaissance is coming to London. This is Bloomberg.
If you are a company that is based here, wants to be here, sees your future as headquartered here, London is the best place for you to be. Come and see us. Come and see Downing Street. Come and see the Treasury. We will talk to you about why we think that London is a great place for you to be.
But if you want to be a global business and you might get a better valuation in New York, you might choose to go there.
That is the assumption of some people, and some people have made that decision. But actually, when the analysis has been done, and I've seen this analysis, of what actually happens over a period of time to the valuations of some of those companies, it isn't nearly so rosy as they thought. When they've moved to the US, when they've gone to the US, thinking that it was all going to be the land of milk and honey, and it wasn't. And so what I'd ask them to do is to make sure they consider their home market, because ultimately your home market will give you the truest, best valuation, combined with the reforms that we've done, that I'll talk more about in my speech later, the reforms that we've been carrying out over the last 3-4 years to increase the amount of investment in British business, increase the amount of investment by retail investors, and ultimately make our capital markets match fit for the next 10 years.
There's an expectation, of course, from the polls that Labour will triumph when the election is called, and they have a 20-plus point margin. That won't come as news to you. There is a view as well, being pushed by the Conservative Party, your party, that if Labour get in, they'll raise taxes, they'll make this a less competitive environment. If that's the case, should investors steer clear of the UK until they get some kind of political clarity?
Look, democracies have elections, right? And I don't think we should shy away from that. I don't think we should see that as a negative.
Do you really think Labour is a risk to these capital markets, to the financial sector here in the UK? And if so, how should investors be thinking about that?
Well, I think there are two sides to this coin. I don't want to be overly party political. It's interesting that industry wholeheartedly supports the changes we're making. You're right that they want us to move it faster, and trust me, I want to do that too, and I'm on the phone to the regulators every single day, constantly seeing how we can bring forward these things as fast as we can. But industry supports this. There's broad spread of consensus. On that level, I actually think these changes are for the long term. You know, this Chancellor is somebody who thinks about the long term, as do I. We're not thinking about the next few months and the election.
Bim Al-Falami there, the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, the City Minister responsible for financial services here in the UK. Now, still with us, Bloomberg Opinion's Adrian Woolbridge and our City Editor in London, Catherine Griffiths. Catherine, I mean, the concern is that he's basically saying that London is a place to be, right? That New York is not as rosy as we think it is. But there's so many question marks about the City of London.
Yeah, there are a lot of question marks. I think, you know, and we know the arguments. There are some very compelling arguments for London, that sense of it being the sort of true international home of capitalism, unlike New York, which is sort of obviously an enormous powerhouse, but has historically not had that sort of international feel. And I suppose that's the debate that is now raging as to whether London is losing that international epicentre feel. I think in Davos, with the global elite, as we were, there was a sense that among the sort of the bankers, of course, they're desperate to find candidates for IPO, and of course they can IPO people in the US or the UK or indeed elsewhere. And then if you try to sort of talk to some of the fintechs and the other tech firms, the startups that are British, they like London, they want to list in London, but they have to think about certain things, especially if their trajectory involves growing their business in the US. And then they have to think about, well, can they justify a valuation that they might get in London versus the US?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that struck me when speaking to international investors is that a lot of them still think about Brexit. and we've maybe moved on. Do we know what kind of relationship the City of London in a couple of years will have with the EU?
Well, it's very interesting that we're talking about London versus New York. What we're not talking about is London versus Paris. There was this idea that or Frankfurt, everything would move to Paris or Frankfurt. That hasn't happened. So in that sense, Brexit hasn't been a disaster for the City of London. And I think we will get a closer relationship with London, with Europe under a Labour administration, and that would be a good thing. We'll iron out some of the things, and the Brexit effect will die down in terms of antagonism. I want to say one thing about the Labour Party. The Labour Party has one very good thing to offer to global capitalism from the point of view of Britain, which is stability, which we haven't had under the Conservatives. And that's a very attractive thing. But they're doing one very foolish thing, or promising to do one very foolish thing, which is to basically attack the private schools. In terms of putting taxes, VAT taxes, on school fees, and in terms of perhaps potentially removing their charitable status. Now, one of the big reasons why people want to come here rather than New York is because they think they're going to get a very, very good education and send their children to good British schools. And if that sector is squeezed, if it's subjected to higher taxes, that is a very negative thing to be doing. So I really think they ought to be, if they're concerned with attracting global talent, they ought to be rethinking that policy.
Interesting. Thank you both so much for joining us. Our city editor, Catherine Griffiths, and Bloomberg Opinion's Adrian Woolridge stays with us. Coming up, the next UK government will inherit the most challenging set of tax and spending problems in 70 years. That's according to a leading think tank. We'll discuss that next. And this is Bloomberg. Well, the Institute for Fiscal Studies says the next UK government will inherit the most challenging set of tax and spending problems in nearly 70 years. Adrian Woolridge of Bloomberg Opinion is still with us, and joining us to discuss this as well, Philip Aldrich from Bloomberg's UK economics team. So, Adrian, thank you for sticking around. Philip, welcome to the program. So, you basically wrote a story which is really quite sad reading, right, saying that the next UK government will inherit the most challenging set of tax and spending problems in 70 years. We've already had a rough 10 years, right, in the past. So how challenging is this going to be?
Well, you think about the fact that we've got the debt has gone up to 100% of GDP. 15 years ago, it was about 50% of GDP, and interest rates have gone up from 0.1% at their lowest point to 5.25%. And you put those two things together, you've added about 50 billion of spending, of cost, which is equivalent more or less to the defence budget. So you've got an entirely new, massive department which does nothing, and we've got to cover that. And that is basically eating into all the public services, the spending on public services. So we've got problems with, we've got crumbling public services elsewhere, and is why we have the highest tax burden since in the post-war era. So that's the driving factor behind why the public finances are in such trouble. And yeah, it's how on earth do you deal with this situation, which is now what we have.
And Phil, I guess the problem is that if you're seen as an austerity prime minister, Rishi Sunak really pushed back against, so you have to find some money somewhere to have fiscal space, but actually you'll get hammered for it.
Yeah, well, so the government is trying to find some fiscal space, but that is by sort of making these sort of slightly fictional spending promises for post the election. And as the Office for Budget Responsibility chair said, he says it was generous to call those spending promises fictional because nothing is penciled in. So we have no idea what it is. But the outline of them is for another 5 years of austerity for all departments, effectively, apart from health and maybe one or two others. But this is not like 2010, because 2010 you went into it with lots of sort of, there was capacity within the public services to absorb some austerity. We have no capacity to absorb austerity. So you're making spending promises which effectively are going to be austerity. They've not said that. As the IFS says, we need to be honest about the trade-offs, and we're not hearing that sort of that honest story. And it's going to be. It is. I think what we have turned into is Italy when we used to look at Italy's public finances and say, God, and the weak growth and high debt, it's effectively what the UK is now, sadly.
I mean, on the upside, the espresso is also better in the UK in the last 10 years. But to stabilise the debt, and if you look at the numbers, right? So debt has soared from 50% of GDP to almost 100% of GDP in the last 15 years. These are numbers in Phil's piece. So, I mean, are tax rises coming? And could this be, something that's actually needed across the G7 world?
Britalia, I think, is the phrase for what we are now. But yes, basically we have a system in which, a situation in which we have an ageing population, we have an increased need for defence spending, and yet we have a government that's talking about tax cuts, that want to go into this election on tax cuts, and that is an unsustainable model. So in the long term, we will have to have spending increases of various sorts. We'll have to remain a fairly high tax economy. And the government is still fixated on Thatcherism, on the Thatcher era. It looks back at this era when we were cutting public spending. But the big story about the Thatcher era was it was a period of very healthy demographics, when we had a relatively young population. So we had lots of room to do this sort of thing. We're basically an ageing, slow-growth society, and that is not a society that benefits, that can have sustained low taxes.
Phil, is there anything in green investment? I mean, is there a way of actually, I guess, generating money that's unique to the UK?
That's the magic we need, right? So the magic is always productivity. That's what everyone will talk about, is we get productivity. Now, it could be that AI is this magic ingredient, because if you think about how economies like Germany's, they had this productivity surge as you automated manufacturing, as you automated production. Now, in theory, AI is going to automate services. We're a very services-heavy economy. Not all services can be automated to some degree by AI, but some of it can. So you could get this kind of little productivity boost through AI. I mean, again, this is fanciful in a way, but we can hope.
Well, let's hope. Thank you both for joining us, Phil Aldrich and Adrian Woolridge. Also, check out our podcast that comes out today. You can subscribe. I host it with David Merritt and Allegra Stratton. It's out today, and we look at Trump in the UK. This is Bloomberg.